my banker called me and said, "Hey, let's get lunch on Monday." And I was like, "You're about to kill it, aren't you?" And he was like, "No, no, no, no." I was like, "If you're going to kill it, tell me, because I got to figure this out." We went to lunch on Monday and they killed it.
That's my friend Nolan Gore, and he's pretty intense, but that intensity has taken him from the Marines to owning an $8 million landscaping company. And he's here today to give you the look into entrepreneurship that most won't, like how ignorance can actually help get us started.
My dad called me and said, "Do you want to put your life savings into a little landscaping company that's not making much money?" And so I said, "That's a great idea."
As well as some of these experiences, what are the pieces in due diligence that you will never miss again?
3 super easy, just no one looks stupid things.
And at the end of it, I ask him, does he still think everyone should own a business?
Several years ago, I would have told you and everybody, you should get into small business, but
You're not going to want to miss this one. Enjoy. Love you guys.
I run a residential lawn and landscaping business. We mow about 1,700 lawns weekly or every other week. And then we do a bunch of additional work for those people. So landscaping jobs like planting plants and sod and mulch and doing some fertilization. Actually, we sell our fertilization, but irrigation. But generally, we cut tall grass to short grass, and then we sell additional things to those people.
People, a couple times a month.
Yep.
As insanity.
We actually just today, it was unfortunate. We just today had someone, they're moving, but they've been a client with us for 11 years. And that was really cool to see.
Wow.
So of course, not everyone ends up being that good.
So 1,700 customers. Give me an idea of scale. Like how many crews is that? How much revenue per year? What does your business look like?
Yes. So revenue this year will be around 7.5 million. We have about 80 employees. It's somewhat seasonal.
Wow.
So it kind of flexes up and down. 5 of those are overseas, and I fully count that as employees, obviously. From a crew perspective, what that actually looks like every day is somewhere between 18 and 21 crews and then 3 irrigation vans. And a crew is usually 3 guys, but sometimes 2.
All right. So you are living the dream. Some would say the SMB wet dream of buying that first business and just growing it, scaling it. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening. Tell me about your background. Like, how did you get into this in the first place?
Well, I assume your joke was in reference to the irrigation department. And so
it was actually,
no harm,
thank
no
you.
foul.
Yes. Yep. 100%.
I will start by saying several years ago, I would have told you and everybody, you should get into small business. And it is really hard. And so this so-called dream is just extraordinarily, it's an honor, it's humbling, and it is fun and rewarding, and it's still really hard. And so there's like still anybody that does these things will tell you that, and that you've experienced it yourself. There's a lot of days still that you don't want to be doing it. On every day that I have a good day, like I've slept enough and had enough caffeine and worked out, and I can look at myself and go, I know this is actually exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. But you have like a bad sleep day and you wake up and you're like, I don't know if I want to do this.
Especially in home services or businesses that have low switching costs. Like there are times where you just feel like you're on a treadmill because I got 10 customers this week. Oh, we churned 4. You're like, oh, what just happened with those customers? So it's a grind, man. But getting past that $5 million mark, in my experience, could be different in your industry. That's kind of like, that's the differentiator for people. Is that what you have found? Like kind of where is it in your business where it's gone from you, one-man crew, to now like scaling?
I definitely think actually your 5 million mark's probably not quite off. I think that what I mean by that is I've started to be less the only problem solver, which is really nice. I don't really deliver plants or mulch anymore, and I'm not usually jumping on the crew when someone doesn't show up. And I haven't done that for about a year or 2 now, but I do think I'm probably 2 or 3 more years out from being like really just a leader of fleet. And some of that's self-imposed. I actually enjoy, and I think it's important for my soul to be like connected all the way down to the bottom with the organization. It reminds me of how hard these guys work and how blessed I am to be in the position I am. I don't have I say this mostly jokingly, but I was almost a real estate bro. That world is so disconnected from the guy that sweats and like cuts the grass or cleans the windows that it's really easy to become discontent in that world and think your problems are really hard, and maybe they are. But like, I really love seeing Rogelio and being like, that guy he does his job really well and often does his job better than I do my job. And so like, that's important to me. So some of this like down in the weeds is self-imposed, but that's it. That's generally take.
You're a guy who gets down and dirty. Like, I think what your background's super interesting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Like, how did you even think about this business? Where did it come from? How did you get into it?
Yeah. So I'm the son of a small business guy. We say small business people because entrepreneur implies starting something. In my head, it's not exactly, but that's kind of what I don't have any desire to start something that's really harsh. But I ran around the office at these various companies my dad built and in some cases started, and never realized that was strange. Then I went to Texas A&M, married my high school sweetheart, and went into the Marine Corps. And in retrospect, at the time it wasn't so, but in retrospect, part of the reason I was doing that was to run away from my dad's shuttle. I have a great relationship with him, but he's extraordinarily gifted, and that's intimidating. And so I wanted to go do something that was my own thing. And so I did the Marine Corps, and my wife says that was a bit of a bait and switch because when I had her fall for me, by God's grace, I wasn't thinking about the Marine Corps, and I don't know if she would have, if that was the case, but once I had her hooked, that's what I decided to do. And so I did 4 years in the Marine Corps, and that was character shaping for obvious reasons. And I had a really, really good experience in the Marine Corps. I was an officer.
Were you deployed, or like, what was that experience like?
Yeah. So I was deployed to Iraq at the beginning of the ISIS stuff. When we went back into Iraq for that, I was fortunately not kicking indoors. When you're in Emily, there's this like weird screw loose where you just kind of want to be the guy that's doing that. And all of my guys wanted to be the guy that was doing that. But of course, now in retrospect, it is a good thing that I didn't have to do that.
Yeah, dude.
We were doing a lot more training and whatnot. And then I did an additional, it wasn't a full deployment, but several months over in Oman doing a big exercise over there. And by the time it was time to think about whether or not I wanted to stay in, we had our first kid, a daughter, who did this beautiful art above me, which I will sell for the right price for anyone who is looking here to start.
Link in bio.
We'll put a link in the show notes here too. But yeah. And so we had such a good experience. Because it was such a good experience, I was apprehensive about staying in because I knew it was probably just going to get worse. And so I was looking to do what was next and was going to do the obvious thing, which was go get an MBA because that's a punt. And okay, sometimes, but sometimes it's a punt. And even then that's okay. But someone came to my dad and said, hey, this little landscaping business I'd love to get rid of it because it's not my real thing. And I ended up owning it because of some legal stuff. And so my dad called me and said, do you want to put your life savings into a little landscaping company that's not making much money? And so I said, that's a great idea.
All right, now's the part of the show where I feel the most uncomfortable, but my therapist says I need to face my fears. So here we are. I've started a newsletter and I want you to subscribe. And what you're going to get every single week are the aggregated conversations from that week that I have on this podcast with an overview of what their business actually looks like. I'm also going to throw in a review of 1 or 2 businesses that are listed for sale. I'll give you my opinion on whether or not the EBITDA multiple is good, or there's customer concentration, or there's red flags or green flags. And then lastly, I'm going to give you one piece of actionable advice every single week on how to buy your first business. So click the link below, subscribe to my newsletter, and let's get back into the show. This part I find interesting. Why didn't your dad say, hey, come into the family business, so to speak? Why did he say, you should buy this and do your own thing, Nolan?
I think there's a couple of reasons, and I don't know how explicit he would have been about this or if it's something we kind of see in retrospect. But one, and very importantly, we didn't know if I was any good. I had general characteristics that implied I had the potential to be decent at this job or a job. But I think we talked about this offline before, where just because someone can run a really fast 40 and jump really high and has really great hands doesn't mean they're going to be a really good receiver. And so just the fact that I was relatively smart, grit, can work hard, and an inclination towards leadership doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be successful in business. And I think we're seeing a track record now that implies that maybe someday I'll actually be decent at this. But I think part of it was you don't want to put me in a situation with his organization that could not go well. Secondarily, he knows I want to do my own thing. And we've talked for years about me joining him. And there was a point there actually where I tried and it just didn't work out for various partnership reasons from his side of things, with one of his partners. I think we decided that this was a good chance at seeing whether or not it was worthwhile. And I think also it was a small enough risk. I mean, it was a big risk, but it was not something that was going to sink my life type risk, that it was a good practice rep. So if it didn't go well, it would be really painful, but not debilitating for my life. I was still only 27 at that point. So I think that those reasons combined.
When you were in the position, were you like, oh, this makes perfect sense. My dad has experience. I have experience. It's a sweaty business. Let's roll. What's the worst thing that can happen? Or were you thinking, I don't really want to do this. I kind of wanted to do something else and like begrudgingly took the opportunity? What was your mental state like at that time?
First of all, I didn't know what the acronym ETA was until like last year. I saw it on Twitter and I had to Google it, and it was kind of actually a hard Google because it obviously is not the
Estimated time
first acronym. Yeah. And so not a thing in my brain, one.
Yeah.
Two, I'm blessed and cursed, depending on the day or the moment, to have extreme self-confidence. And so there wasn't really I wasn't like scared. I was naive. And so it was like, I actually don't remember that process very much. I remember looking at like, I should apply for schools and I want to go back to Austin because that's where our families are. And here's an opportunity. I could probably pull that off. Let's do it.
Okay. So you were just like, you were in it. You were ready to roll. That's actually really cool. How big was that first business?
I don't recommend necessarily to do it the way I did it. Like we was only doing 1.6 in revenue, which is not only, it's obviously a sizable business, but like I looked at some spreadsheets, but I have a finance background, but I didn't like know the business at all. I looked at the website. I like didn't really visit. There was a guy here who's still my business partner who was helping run it at the time. He didn't have equity and we brought him in to the partnership, and we'd done some background to make sure he had character, and he does, and all this stuff. But like, other than that, like we met kind of one time before I was like showed up as the 26-year-old guy being like, I'm one of the new bosses.
I personally believe there's so much luck involved with success. Like I look back on things and I think, what was I thinking? Dude, X, Y, and Z could have gone wrong. I could have lost my house. I could have gone into debt. Like it could have been a terrible, terrible situation, but it worked out. And I'm grateful that it worked out. And so I look back and I'm like, gosh, man, so many cool breaks that happened. And like what you're describing, to look back, you're like, yep, I met him a few times and partnered with him, and thankfully it's worked out. But I think there's a certain level of naivete that an entrepreneur needs to have to get in. Because if you knew everything that was going to happen, I'm not sure that you would actually do that first thing, because it can be so risky.
I agree. And I think inevitably going to be bad at the job when you first start. I mean, for years. And I don't know if you've seen the Dunning-Kruger effect or whatever the graph is, but there's a lot of people that are a lot of similar ideas, but it's basically the idea of, and I experienced this 100%. That's why I'm talking about it. I am really good at this job. And then you get a little bit more time and you go, dude, I am really bad. And then it's a slow progression to, and it sounds like offspring, but it's a slow progression to competency. And that was 100%. My first year, I was like, I have my shit together. The economy was awesome. So we were growing. I raised prices and people stuck around. I was like, I don't know what everyone says here. And then year two, and I remember like cringe conversations with people being like, yeah, man, come watch, I'll show you how I do it and all this stuff.
I think I know like
year two. Yeah. And year two is just, and it wasn't even year two. I think we did better financially, but I just realized how much I didn't know. And it was so scary. And I mean, I'm on year almost about to do my 8th year at this point. And I'm like, I listened to one of your things earlier and realizing, golly, that's another hole in my business I just do not get at all. And it's just like, when I make the joke about like, someday I might be good at this, like, I'm meeting that. Like we're going, and I need the good keep going so I can actually maybe get good at this. But back to what we were saying earlier, you have to be naive. And then the only reason that people do it again is because they've actually overcome, I think I can do it now. If I try it again with that skill set? No way. If I can just try again with this skill set, I now understand what it's going to take, and that's going to be pretty hard, but I probably can do it again.
My first job out of college, I had a lot of experience with doing acquisitions, transitioning them, et cetera. And on the first 3 or 4 that I did, I crushed it. Dude, I was the man. Made so much money.
Yes.
Everybody was like,
yes,
how did he do it? He's a wunderkind. I'm like 27, just crushing. And then
speaking German already.
I was like, oh, das ist gut. Yeah. And then we bought this business in Southern California, and I'm like, I could do it. And it was such a crappy business. Business was declining. Operations sucked. The product was terrible. A ton of things. But I'm like, I could turn it around. Spoiler alert, I did not turn it around. I got fired.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky I learned on somebody else's dime. But now there's so much I learned from that experience. Like, okay, I'm not the sales guy. I'm the ops guy, but I am not the sales guy. Or, oh, there's these things I needed to do in due diligence. And to your point, if you can take those and fail forward, if you can take your failures and learn from them, then the next time you see something similar, you have some pattern recognition and you can actually make a really, really good decision for yourself. So I like the way that you're articulating it.
And I'll add to that to say you got these tangible skill sets, but you also have built the ability to deal with these things emotionally, fortitude, understand just like this problem is really bad, or this person quit and that seems like it's going to sink us. But I've been through 3 or 4 of these. That person is essential to the business. And we figured it out. And I need to find someone good. And every time you find someone good again, you're like, was that luck? Or am I actually good at finding people? Both. And so it just gives you like additional emotional capacity to deal with the really hard ups and downs of this whole thing.
I think of business as baseball. Like if you're in baseball, this is what's crazy. Ted Williams, like the greatest hitter of all time. I think he had a career batting average of 400. Actually, it's probably less. He probably had a few seasons of 400, but high 300s.
About my batting average in T-ball.
Well, here's the thing. When you say, oh, he had a batting average of 400, what that actually means is 40% of the time he hit the ball, 60% of the time he struck out. So you're telling me the GOAT, the greatest hitter of all time, struck out 60% of the time. 60% of the time he's walking back to the dugout with his head down because he just struck out or grounded out or whatever it is. Okay. But if you can hit the ball 35% of the time, you're going to make $100 million over the course of your career. It's nuts to me. And that's how I think of business. You're not 100% right all the time, but you can get to a point where if everybody else is right 50% of the time and you're right 65% of the time, you're doing better. You're doing business better than other people because there's always a risk. There's always a downside. And to your comment, like, was I lucky? Did I learn how to hire them? No, man, you're learning how to hire people the right way and you're mitigating your risk so that if on average somebody hires someone and it works out 50% of the time, but you've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, 75% of the time, I know it's going to work out. That's great. You're outperforming the market. It's exceptional performance, but you're never, ever going to get to 100%. There's nobody who has the 100% track record of success. And if they tell you that, they're probably just trying to sell you a course.
Love that. I actually on this wall over here have a business card. So we're talking about the hiring thing. And it's a business card of a guy that I hired and fired within 2.5 days. A big hire. And like, I just totally screwed it up. And like, we were on top of it so much that we got business cards within a couple of days. And I mean, like, just a hilarious miss that people bring up all the time around here to make me small, which is hilarious. I bring it up too. But poor Ryan, poor me for screwing that up. Freaking team for me screwing that up.
But here's the thing. Like, yes, you're going to be wrong a good percentage of the time. The question is, how do you respond to your mistakes? Do you double down on them or do you iterate? And you fired quickly. Like, it's so important to fire quickly. So important. If you know, you know, and it's not fair to them to keep them in that role. And it's definitely not fair to your team. So along those lines, you did your first acquisition, 1.6 million in revenue. I don't remember what the purchase price was, but you grow that baby to, I'm going to guess $6 to $7 million or $6 million a year in revenue. But you've done an acquisition recently, correct?
Correct. So just about 9 months ago at this point, we bought a competitor, and I can talk you through how we found that in quotes. and then how that's gone and some of the stories along the way.
Yeah.
If you think that'd be interesting.
No, I'm super curious because a lot of people who are listening want to buy their first business, or they bought their first business, things have gone fine. They want to buy a second one. And I think it's important to understand that just because you've done one thing once successfully doesn't mean the next one's going to be successful. So make sure you have as much knowledge, or you're going into it with as much forethought as possible of the potential downside. So yeah, I would love to hear how you found it, how you did due diligence, what happened during the transition.
Yeah. So I found it by eating enchiladas. Highly recommend. I'm usually a tortilla soup guy. And so the fact that it was enchiladas is important. But no, I just try to get lunch with other people running these businesses as much as possible, because there's a lot of grass and we can learn from each other. And I'm relatively young. And so I go to these guys and say, hey, someday you're going to want to be done, and I'm going to be doing this for a long time. And so when you want to be done, let me know. And so there's a couple around town that I've been eating with for years. And one of these guys came, we had an hour and 10-minute lunch and just talked about all the things. And then at the very end, like literally 70 minutes in, he was like, hey, by the way, I'm thinking about selling. Like, do you want to? And I was like, sure. Why didn't we talk about this from the beginning? It turned into another conversation. But the reason that we did that, and there's a couple nuggets along the way. One, he was about a third my size, which is a really good tuck-in size. Because it's big enough and chunky enough that it makes a big difference, but it's not so big that it's going to sink you, and it doesn't like completely disrupt your culture.
People talk a lot about tuck-ins. What is that? What do you consider that to be?
I'll just tell you why this was classically a tuck-in for us. I actually don't know what classically means, but a tuck-in being, we're going to add another business into our existing business that does pretty much the exact same thing. Obviously, every business does things systems-wise very differently, but we were a residential lawn and landscaping company. They were a residential lawn and landscaping company. We were in South Austin. They were in South Austin. They used the same subs as us. They used the same software as us. So a lot of things aligned for this to make sense.
The other thing I would add is, like, when people are talking about tuck-ins, they're thinking, okay, they have a leadership team. We have a leadership team. We can keep the work that's being provided, the services that are being provided by the actual people the same, but we can eliminate some positions and realize some economies of scale. Usually That's one of the reasons that there's a tuck-in, because it's like, oh, cool, I can add more revenue and it's going to juice earnings to the bottom line. Boom. Makes a lot of sense.
Other reason people might do tuck-ins is if there is like one or two, and actually you may not call it a tuck-in, but you're buying the ability to do another service. So like if they have a department, if we do 80% the same, but that other 20% is something that I want to be able to do. Like if I wanted to do irrigation and they had a strong irrigation department, that would be another reason to add it. And you can then take their systems and apply it across your entire set of clients. It's another good reason to do something like this, but meaning that would mean it would be worth more to me than it would be to someone else. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of good reasons to do this on paper. And he was eager to be done. But one of my big takeaways is that I then became eager to do this because it sounded like fun and people talked about doing these things. And I want to be someone that does these kinds of things. And I kind of pushed back on moving the close date because of seasonality and whether or not I wanted to like actually figure out if I could do this and bring my team along instead of just Nolan wanting to do it. Anyway, we worked through the whole thing. We could talk a little bit about it, assessing that, et cetera, but they'd had some rough years. And so applying a standard multiple to an EBITDA number was not an appropriate way to value it because it would have basically been worth essentially zero. And so we looked at it from an asset perspective and from a client perspective and really valued it that way.
How did you underwrite this business? So yes, it's tuck-in, right? But what were you looking at or looking for to make the decision of like, should we or shouldn't we buy this business for an agreed upon purchase price?
So kind of what I was saying there is I don't think I did that super well. I don't think I had a line in the like, this is where it will be worth it and this is where it won't be, because I just wanted to do it. And so a big learning lesson for Nolan going forward, and this isn't going to turn out to be a horrible thing for us. It's going to be okay to good. And the next 5 years. But one thing that Nolan needs to learn is like, I need to separate the emotions of something from the reality of it and be able to be more competent and analytical in these decisions. But we had the money and I wanted to grow because I want to be someone that runs a bigger business. And so I say that with sarcasm, right? Like that's not a good reason to do something. But we looked at it and essentially, like I said, we couldn't value it top down. So we had to be like, okay, all the vehicles are worth X number of dollars. All the clients are worth X number of dollars. Don't I wish I had a better understanding of what my CAC was? Because that would be really useful in this moment. All of their, like all that kind of stuff. And we kind of threw some stuff together, and I was with a friend who was very good at acquisitions, and he helped me like be like, Nolan, you don't want to pay that much. You want to pay this much. I was like, well, but I can, and he's like, no, like him helped me work through what was wise. And we got to a point and it didn't make the seller all that happy, but we kept working through it and we got to a point where we could both get there. And I'll tell one story about financing and then I can tell you more about like day one if you want, or if you have another question.
Yeah, no, keep going. I'm listening. Cause you had some financing complications.
Yeah. So we were going to do it with SBA and do it based off of my company's cash flow, because in a SBA deal where you're getting the same, whatever, NAIC code, you can either do you can base it off of your own company's cash flow, and in some cases do a zero down. And so that was like, from a financial instrument perspective, that's zero plan on doing it was going to be really great. Well, our bank cut their SBA department mid this whole process. But they said, hey, we'll carry this one through. We just can't do any more. I was like, okay, cool. And we kept, and I'm the kind of person that was texting him once a week. Going, we're still good, right? Hey, we're still good, right? And then on like a Friday afternoon, my banker called me and said, hey, let's get lunch on Monday. And I was like, you're about to kill it, aren't you? It is. He's like, no. I mean, let's talk on Monday. I was like, if you're going to kill it, tell me, because I got to figure this out. And we went to lunch on Monday and they killed it. And so I went to a different bank. We didn't do SBA. We did just lending or financing based off of the assets. So it was a lower financing amount. We had the ability to do the deal anyway. And we figured it out that way. But it frustrated me. And I think the takeaway for people is you need to have multiple banking connections, not just, even if you're best buddies with that one guy or gal, like have multiple ways of getting funding. And even afterwards, even though it frustrated me, I've still kept the relationship. And part of me wants to burn that bridge because it'd be fun, but like, that's just not useful. I was literally texting with the banker that shut down the deal right before we got on this call. I try to keep all the options open because winning is moving the ball forward for the next several decades. And I'm going to need all of these opportunities I can get, whether or not I think that they handled something appropriately or not. I just need to make sure I'm prepared for it.
Now that you've transitioned it, and there are all the transitionary things that you need to worry about, but what are the pieces in due diligence that you will never miss again? What was it about the deals that, looking back, you're like, man, it's not a home run. It's only going to ever be good to great, okay to good because of XYZ things?
3 super easy, just Nolan looks stupid things. 1, better job of assessing the assets, the vehicles specifically. Big part of the valuation was off of those vehicles and they were horrible. I mean, one of them broke down the drives from there to our office on day 1. Another one I went and pulled off the side of the highway day 2. And so we ended up putting a lot of money into assessing what was keepable versus what we should just transition away or sell. And so we went through a tremendous administrative process of getting them all into our name and then offloading them. And we spent a lot of money in the process. And so that was just super frustrating. We ended up having to get $50K back from the seller in that process. And he handled it with a lot of grace. And I don't think he was malicious, but it was something that I wish I could have done.
It was still an issue.
Secondarily, an expensive issue. I mean, it hurt the economics of the whole thing pretty significantly. And second one I'd say is, this is like a small, very tactical piece, but I didn't put enough weight on how they thought about holidays. And so like they traditionally had a bunch of time around Christmas that they gave employees as like their annual kind of PTO. And we didn't. And I just looked over that and it turned into I mean, I still feel sick about that because these guys are all planned on having time around Christmas off. And I was like, we can't do that's a huge expense. And so I should have gone to the seller and said, hey, we're gonna split this. You guys are still gonna get that, but you're gonna assume part of that cost because you've basically been building it up all year. It's not been a explicit part of compensation, but it's something everyone thought they were gonna get. So that turned into a trust issue. It was frustrating for everybody. That was horrible.
You're hitting on something that's actually really important that a lot of people don't think about, which is when you buy a business or when you sell a business, your employees have accrued benefits, whether that's sick time, vacation time, holidays, whatever they are. And so on the balance sheet of a seller are going to be those liabilities. If you step in and you either assume them or don't assume them, but it hasn't been communicated to the employees and the employer didn't pay out those benefits when they left, then you look like a jerk come Christmas. What I would have done, or that's one thing I had to learn is like, okay, seller, you either pay out the benefits or we lower the purchase price commensurate with what the benefits are going to be, or we go to working capital and there's a working capital adjustment. But it sounds like you didn't even have that conversation with him.
Yeah. And they weren't official explicit benefits. It was just something they'd done for years and counted on. And so I don't think I handled it great. I really don't, but I just undervalued that thing. I just didn't understand it. I wanted to get the deal done and move through the process. And it was one more thing that I should have really worked through. And I'll give you a third one. This one's probably the most important of the three is we didn't have shared language on services. And I thought we did. And so when they said that they have a basic lawn maintenance, to me in our company, that means we just mow the lawn, edge it, and get off the property. And so I went through 100 of their clients and checked pricing. And I was like, these are priced pretty well. There's some weird ones, but it's pretty weird. Like, we're going to be in a good spot here. But when you started to dig really deep in what that basic lawn maintenance meant to them, it meant on this house, we're going to do the weeding in that bed. And on this house, we're going to pick up the leaves every time. And, on this house, we're not going to mow. We're just going to blow off this surface and do this other thing and then wash the dog. They didn't actually wash the dog. But lots of random stuff.
How is it?
Yeah, no. And that turned into a huge disaster, right? Like the transitioning of how they built their packages in our software and communicating to the customers and disentangling those services. And hey, this person basically getting a price raise because we're taking one of their services away, even though we're not raising the dollar amount. Talk about a huge problem, 650 clients.
That's what I was going to ask. Okay. So of your 1,700 clients, this was 650. That's a third, essentially. A little more than a third.
Well, so it was basically maybe only half of their clients had that stuff. So 300, and these are rough numbers, but we had to go and have those conversations and then look at all the other ones and be like, okay, this one's good, but their pricing's bad. Let's go fix it. Like all that kind of stuff was hard. So those are my three big, like, I'm never going to screw that up again. Those are, and in retrospect, anybody that's done it like you did, you would have had the checklist to catch all that stuff.
Now I would, but and luckily I learned on other people's dimes, but yeah, man, like my first couple acquisitions, I honestly just got lucky that they were good acquisitions, but you don't really need the checklist for the good acquisitions. You need the checklist specifically for the bad ones because when they go bad, they go really, really bad. And I had to learn, okay, what is important? Thankfully now I have a good sense, but it's an acquired skill. It's not something that anybody just knows innately because you like the benefits thing. You don't think about that. Who thinks about that when they're negotiating a deal? Nobody thinks about that. But when you are sitting with an employee 6 months later and they're like, well, what happened to all my PTO? I had $1,000 built up. And you're like, yeah, what does happen? Did the seller pay you that? No. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't have that anymore. They don't care about the seller anymore. They care about you. Like, what are you going to do to fix it? And then it becomes a whole massive issue. So I got some questions here to finish up. Are you ready? How big do you want to grow?
We explicitly state that we want to be the largest residential lawn and landscape company in Texas. I think it's going to take a decade to get there. And I don't have a clear line on who that is because almost all the big boys are commercial. So I know that it's probably in the 40 to 50 million range. And I will say the reason for that is because I believe in I think it sounds fun and it's not a good reason, but I think it sounds like a good challenge and really fun. And I've seen big businesses built, and it sounds like a great challenge for us. But two, I think that one of the things we really want to provide is just like opportunity. And right now there's like not that much, there's opportunity. We're getting to be a larger business, but like you look at the guy on the front line, it's like, really busting his ass, and you're like, where else do I go? It's like, there's not very many stacked next steps.
Right.
And as we get bigger, there's more opportunity for the team. And so I'd love to see that.
Do you think growth is more through acquisition or startup?
I think that we will do more acquisitions, and that will be a useful tool. But I think that the majority of it's going to come organically. Alan, for any listeners out there that want to come and help me figure out how to do that better, I would love for you to call me, because it's hard. It's hard to figure out. I mean, all the pieces are moving all the time, you know?
It's a good thing you had a bad experience with the transition early, because now you have a lot of lessons learned, which is great. It saves you a lot of headache. You'd rather do that on $1 million deal than a $10 million deal. You know what I mean? What do you love about this business?
I mentioned it earlier, but I am made to be in a heavy human business. And what I mean by that is, like, God made me to be around people and to lead a lot of messy humans. That doesn't mean it's fun, but I know that's what I'm supposed to do. And so I get a lot of groundedness from being around the guys on the front lines. I like being in a business where it's not, so what stinks about being in air conditioning is like, they only call you on a bad day. In landscaping, it's like an essential, but it's like, they're happy at the end of it, right? You go home and like your yard's mowed and you're like, this feels great. Or you go home and you have a new bed that's really well maintained and new plants, and you're like, this is great. Our product actually appreciates as it matures, as opposed to depreciates if you're doing it right. And so we get to have a lot of happy conversations. Of course, most people that call are grumpy, because that's how the world works. But those are some things that I really love about this business in general. And it's just, I love nature. I mean, it shows me what God does, and get to go out there and learn about all these little weird plants and talk about them. And that's fun for me.
What do you hate about it?
It's really hard not to become cynical around what do I love the most people? What do I hate the most people? It's hard not to become cynical around let's be honest, is generally a lower income demographic that's running on these crews. And generally, not entirely, because we have a whole bunch of them that aren't problems, but generally there's a lot of life problems. And so every morning,
Triggered.
you get some people calling in, and it's hard not to be like, are you just being incompetent or unreliable, or is that really a life problem? So it's hard not to, what I don't like is like when I start to feel cynical around team's performance and reliability. And I know that happens in every business when you're running stuff, but
I'm going to tell you something, hopefully to make you feel better. Doesn't change with income. I manage a lot of people who are making high 5 figures, low 6 figures. And there are still those ones that are always calling like, oh, sorry, my daughter's sick, or, oh, sorry, I'm late today. Like, there's always an excuse for it. And that is very, very frustrating. Unfortunately, you would think that it would scale better. Like, oh, well, these are people who are in better positions and they went to college but man, it's just one of the problems with dealing with employees. It's hard to manage all of that stuff. So
one thing I will say that's been like a treat in the last 18 months is starting to work with people overseas. They're so hungry. And because of that, the reliability, and also you get, like, if you pay well comparatively, like, you get very high quality people.
Some real talent. Yeah.
And we have one girl on our team that I texted her early one morning, hey, can you do this thing? And she was like, hey, is it okay? I already told my manager, but like, I've got 2 feet of water in my house. So like, I'll get to it, but like, can I have a little bit of time? And I was like,
could you give me 15 minutes?
Of course. Yeah. No, take care of your family. And she was just repeatedly apologetic. And I was like, no, so he sent me the pictures, right? Like, no, this is a legit excuse. Like, you're hungry. She shows up on good days and bad days, wants to be there, wants the job, wants to work. And that's so fun when you work with people like that. And we have people here in the US that are the same way, but like, percentage wise, I found it to be really refreshing to start working with more people overseas.
All right, let's build on that. So all of us are jealous in some capacity. I'm curious for you, what businesses or industries are you the most jealous of right now?
I'm super proud of what my brother's building. I know you've had him on, and go listen to that episode number.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Number seven,
But
we'll put a bio,
link in the show notes.
link in bio. Yeah, look at show.
He's so smart and so good at what he does. He builds very, very high quality pitch decks for people trying to raise money, specifically in venture. And I find myself on days when my team isn't reliable or whatever, being like, shoot, I could just go do something like that. It doesn't mean he doesn't have his problems. He does, but he's got a great team right now, and they're killing it. And so that sounds really fun. Like white collar services sometimes sound really nice. Secondarily, I have good friends who are in the commercial space around cleaning and security, and like some of my best friends. And they've built reputations over decades with my dad, actually, where they have a lot of really great connections. And so one of my friends started 2 companies in the last like 18 months or 2 years. And both of them are going to probably pass me in revenue size, like,
oh my gosh,
the next year, if not already. It's like 99% of me is just so psyched for my good friend because he is that good, and they're really good operators and really good at serving people.
It's the 1% that you're like, why did I pick the wrong freaking business?
Yeah, he like adds a downtown skyscraper, and he adds $1 million in revenue. That's an overstatement, but it's like the chunkiness on that stuff sounds so fun. And whereas I go and like hustle and sell $4,000, I'm like, and it's not to say he's not hustling stuff. So I think those two are just it's like some of my closest people that I get to see, but also I get to learn from and celebrate. And it's okay if they're bigger.
I asked that question. Doesn't mean you're like, okay, I'm going to quit and this is what I'm doing next. But we're all jealous of different aspects of different businesses. So I'm always curious to hear people talk about like, oh man, I love commercial real estate. It just seems like sign me up, triple net lease, send me a check in the mail every month. I don't need to worry about anything. But they have their own issues and problems. So for you, if you have 2 hours in the day, and I know this is hard because you have a special needs son who requires a lot of time, energy, and attention. But let's just say you have 2 hours in the day, you have no family time or no family responsibilities, and you have no work responsibilities. What are you obsessed with? What are you spending your time on?
I'm very physically inclined. I'm going to take that time and work out almost every time. That's just the funnest for me.
Love it.
But right now, what that looks like is I got it as a good 30-year-old would do. Dad of 4, I got into jujitsu in the last year. And so I've been going at lunch. And let me tell you, it has been the most fun I've had in a long time because it is highly competitive, highly physically rigorous, technical, and it's hit everything I needed it this year with my really hard year with my son, just giving my ability to completely turn off everything. You literally can't think about your problems when someone's trying to choke you. Like you can only think about that arm and what you're going to do with your body to get out of that situation.
You can think about your problems, but unfortunately there's only one problem, and it's that python around your neck just squeezing. Like, that's the only problem that's on your back.
And I'm still so junior at this that there's a lot of jokes coming at me every day that I go. And so I'd do that every single day if I could for at least an hour, maybe more than an hour. And then I love reading. I do most of my reading through audio now because of my life circumstances and I drive and stuff, but I'm probably going to end up reading and working out, sometimes both at the same time.
It's a great answer, man. It's a great answer. All right. Last question. What advice would you give yourself 10 years ago? Nolan, he's probably enlisted 10 years ago. I'm not quite sure, but he's either just gotten out or he's still in. What advice would you give yourself?
I'm going to come back to the question. If I was giving it to someone else, because I did this on accident, I was in the Marine Corps at that point. I was an officer then, but getting leadership experience is, if considering running a business, like you need to know what it feels like to make decisions for other humans, good and bad, and whether or not you actually want to carry that. And so I got that in the Marine Corps. I got that all over life before that, but the Marine Corps in a really big way. And so that was super, super useful to me in what I decided to do after the Marine Corps. And I didn't understand that's what I was doing at the time, but just making hard decisions that were unpopular and figuring out how to execute with a team was very, very helpful for me. And I think a lot of people idealize running a company but have never actually led, managed, held accountable anybody. And it's not fun a lot of the time. And so you have to know whether or not you actually really do want to do that thing. For me, I think what advice I would give myself 10 years ago, I don't know. It's not to say that I had it all figured out, but like, think working hard on understanding what would, like, a big part of my life story is I'm probably not going to be as good at business as my dad, and that's okay. And so working on my personal identity a little bit more, I think would be good. Just kind of humbling me a little bit and taking out a little bit of that self-confidence in a positive way, because it's not all bad.
That's great. Well, this has been a ton of fun, man. Where's the best place for people to find you and follow you?
If I'm going to be on the internet, I'm going to be on the Twitters. And so you can go find me on there. I think you search Nolan Gore, SMB Lawn Cowboy but my handle is Leadership Acad 1.
Well, if you like learning about home services businesses or just entrepreneurship in general, check out this conversation I had with Stephen Montgomery, who is the founder and CEO of Resi Brands, which is a national franchisor that does home services. They have over 450 units, do almost $100 million a year in revenue, and recently got an investment from the queen of boring businesses herself, Cody Sanchez. If you want to check out his conversation, that is episode 44. You can click here on YouTube to check it out. Hope you guys are really enjoying this content, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.